Hello and welcome. I'm Geraldine Wilkins, the Living Water Quilter, and this is Quilt Conversations Live. It's so good to be with you again. Hello, Lori. Hello, Marcia, Elaine, Cassie. Nice that you're here. Hello, Sharon. Welcome, welcome. Marcia is here. Greetings to our ladies in Scotland and Hawaii and Delaware. How are you? How have you been? What have you been up to? Have you finished all your holiday crafting? Are you still sewing? Let us know in the chat what you're working on. Are you working on holiday specific projects? You know that we have been gathering together for the last few weeks talking about the 10 steps to stress free machine quilting. And I'm calling it the Master Class Series. We're going over those 10 steps. How many of you can remember the 10 steps? What step are you working on that you really want to improve? Is it your fabric preparation? What about your pressing method? Are you thinking about getting a new iron or a wool pressing mat? What about a clapper? What are you working on? What about your piecing accuracy? Are you working on that, becoming better at piecing? Hello, hello. I would love that cup of coffee, Lori. Can you pass one over here? I would love that. So Lori says she's working on some Christmas cards and she needs to start making jam. You know, Lori, I'm glad you mentioned the jam because the jam you sent me, the last one, the spicy jam, it was a little too spicy for me, but I thought, why can't I use that not for bread, but use it for a cooking sauce? So I've been using your spicy jam in cooking sauce. I mix it up with some other ingredients and it tastes delicious. I'm using it as a cooking sauce with meats and chicken. It's been fabulous. So Sharon says she's been washing fabric and letting her fabric air dry and using best press when she's ironing. That is one of the 10 steps. That is your fabric preparation. Fabulous. Lori says yes. Aw, you're so sweet, Lori. That's so nice of you. Thank you. The other jam went very quickly. It wasn't long. Once I tasted your jam, forget it, right? It's so good. What else are we working on, ladies? Let us know in the chat. All right, here are the 10 steps. If you are new and you're wondering, what is she talking about? What are the 10 steps to stress free machine quilting? And why are we having this conversation? The 10 steps, let's go through them quickly. Fabric preparation, piecing accuracy, your pressing method, your batting selection. There are a lot of choices for batting out there. Are you learning about batting? What about your basting method, which we're going to talk about tonight? And quilt stabilization. That might be a new phrase or term for some of you. We're going to talk about that tonight in detail. And quilting designs, how to select them, and how densely are we going to quilt it is another step. That's step number 7. Okay. Number 8 is quilting design placement. Once you learn the design, once you know how dense you want to quilt it, how do you put it in a quilt? We're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about thread color and weight. And finally, quilting practice. How do you practice your quilting? Now, let's see. What are you ladies saying in the chat? I see no new comments for now. All right. So, tonight, depending upon where you are in the world, or early morning for some like Elaine, we're going to talk about basting and stabilization. But again, we have a lot of new ladies, so I want to recap the 10 steps in one of my projects. I'm going to use it as a quick example, right? So, we need to be able to not only prepare our fabric, and why is it important to prepare our fabric? And Elaine said that she just recently washed some fabric and she's let it dry, and she's going to starch it with best press and then press it. All of that matters when it comes to cutting. And there are different cutting methods. We talk about the different cutting methods, and one of them is using a die cutting machine. I use the AccuQuilt Go cutter for some patterns, and for this one, I use the AccuQuilt Go. Let's see. Hello, welcome. How are you, Kimberly? So glad that you're here. Hello to Ren. Welcome, welcome. So, this is a quilt where I use the AccuQuilt Go cutter for accurate piecing, for accurate cutting. They go hand in hand. So I used it for that block. I used it for half square triangles. And because I prepared my fabric and I used starch to make those fibers just very stiff, they were easily cut without stretching, right? And we want that. All right. Oh, it's only 11 p.m. That's right. There was a time change over there. Awesome. So now this is those blocks put together, and now it's ready for basting. We're going to talk more about basting, but I have had a roller coaster of experience with basting because I tried multiple methods. For one season, I was happy to do one type of basting, and then I changed. And we're going to talk more about that. For this quilt, I spray basted, and I did it outdoors, outside. We don't want to breathe in those fumes, right? So, what about quilt stabilization, which is the topic for tonight? Basting and quilt stabilization. Once it's basted, how do we stabilize the quilt? And in this example, I did some circles throughout the quilt to stabilize the quilt. In the past, we've talked about stabilizing by stitch in the ditch. That works sometimes, but it doesn't always work, right? Oh, you're welcome, Marcia. You're welcome. You're welcome. Good evening, Karen. So glad that you're here. You like the idea of the AccuQuilt cutter. It's fantastic for very specific blocks, for specific patchwork pieces. If you have a pattern with hundreds of half square triangles, you want to use something that's going to cut them accurately. And a Go cutter will do that. So, what happens when we stabilize a quilt? What does it allow us to do? And what is quilt stabilization? You know, once the quilt is finished and you're ready to bind it, you have taken all your steps. And that's why we have this 10 steps to machine quilting, because from the very beginning, you know, I've said this before, it matters. Every single step matters, and it will influence ultimately the quilting, the machine quilting, free motion quilting, walking foot quilting, ruler quilting. It will influence that process. So eventually, from washing fabric to cutting fabric to pressing it, piecing, this is our goal, right? Ultimately, we want to finish a quilt and use it, right? We want the recipient to be blessed by the quilt. That is important to us. So, why do we need to think about basting? And what kind of basting will we do? Did we talk about basting with fusible batting? when we had our discussion about batting, that was one thing that I did. My first choice, my very first choice was pins. How many of you use pins or have used pins to pin base your quilt? Oh, thank you, Marsha. Thank you, Lori. I'm glad you like the quilt. How many of you are pin basters? Let us know in the chat. And how long does it take you to base maybe a baby quilt or a lap size quilt? How many pins do you use? I was using hundreds of pins. It would take me days to pin a large quilt. Ren uses them, fantastic. And Kimberly used them once. Okay. Pins are a good and viable option. And I still use some pins. I don't use them frequently. But again, remember, my journey has been that I have used several methods. So my first method was pins, and I still have those pins. 300 pins, 200 pins in a quilt, in a large quilt. That can get cumbersome when it's time to free motion or walking foot quilt our project. We have to stop and take out the pins as we go. That slows progress. Now, in the beginning, it's fantastic, right? Because we are learning. All right. Pins, clips, and glue sticks, says Lori's. Fabulous. What about clips? What do you mean, Marsha, by clips? Okay, and Jacqueline says, I have, and I still use pins. Lots of pins. I know what that's like. I know what that is like. So Elaine says she used to pin, but now she spray bastes her quilt. It is much quicker. And I recommend, if you've never spray basted or any method of basting, try it. Test and try other methods. You might find you want to use a combination of methods, right? A lady asked me at a workshop last week, what if you're allergic to spray basting? What can you do? And if you don't want to use pins because they get in the way of quilting, what kind of basting do you think she does if she doesn't want to use pins and she's allergic, highly allergic to spray basting, even if she uses it outside? Yes, Sharon, if you are using a long arm, you have a totally different basting method. It's very different, right? You're going to pin at the very top, the quilt top, and you're going to have a leader. You're going to probably baste the sides of the quilt. Some long armers like to baste on both sides of the quilt to keep it straight. Hand based. You are right. That's it. Thread basting. She thread based. And a lot of ladies prefer that. So there's no hard and fast rule about basting. My encouragement is to try different techniques to see which one works for you for the type of machine that you're using. You have a home machine that has its own challenges with quilting. You have a sit down long arm, and you can have a long arm on a frame. All of them have different basting methods. So if you are working with a home machine, what considerations do you have when it comes to basting, right? What considerations do you have when it comes to basting on a sit down long arm, for a sit down long arm? So Marsha says she hand bastes. Yes, I've heard that too, Karen. Some use Elmer's glue, and I've also heard that there's this powder that you can put, and that will then become a glue when you heat it up. So if you can't use the spray basting, which I asked this same lady, I said, can you use a powder? She says, not really, because the powder becomes airborne. And I kind of understand that. I don't want to breathe that in either. Hello, Denise. Welcome, welcome. So glad that you're here. Welcome, welcome. We're talking about the 10 steps to stress free machine quilting. And we're talking about two of the steps, that's basting our quilts. And then we're going to talk about quilt stabilization. So I started out as a pin baster. There's a lot of pin basters in the chat, and some of them spray based. I am now a spray baster. I will spray baste, and then after I will press both sides to make sure everything looks fantastic. And to protect the edges of my quilt, the perimeter, the outer perimeter, I will fold over the backing on top, and I will pin all the way around. I fold over the backing because remember, the backing is bigger than the quilt top. I fold it over the edges and I pin all the way around the perimeter, since I quilt either on my domestic machine or my sit down, and the quilt is being moved quite a bit. I don't want the edges to fray or other things to happen to the edges of the quilt. All right, let's see. So here's another example. You know, this quilt behind me is one of my designs. It's called Color Wave. Color Wave was basted, spray basted outside. Outside. Ah, you like that tip? Fantastic, Kimberly. Yes, that's a fantastic tip with the perimeter pinning all the way around. Depending upon how much backing I have, I will fold it over, and then I don't use the small pins. I use those big safety pins, the ones that are really big. You can use glue sticks. Some will use that, but I haven't tried that myself. I just use those big pins because sometimes it's not just the backing fabric that's turned over, it's also the batting. So the batting and the backing are going to will be bigger than your quilt top, right? So both of those end up being folded over, and the bigger safety pins work really well for pinning through all those layers to protect the edges of the quilt. If you use glue sticks, let us know in the chat which ones you like so the other ladies can try it out. Remember, we're all helping each other and sharing different tips. Yeah, I'm not sure how to use it either. Well, you know what? I don't know if the glue interferes with the quilting. If someone is using Elmer's school glue, it is the washable glue. Elmer's washable school glue. I keep some in my sewing space and I use it. I use it not for quilt basting, I use it for other things. If you press the glue, it will stick the fabric fibers together, and it will dry. It will not be wet. However, I know that if you use too much Elmer's glue, school glue, too much, it becomes not only dry, but hard. And that might be difficult to quilt through. So I would go check out the video someone's talking about and see what their method and technique is. And if you want to try it on a small example. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true, Karen. The edges won't get caught when we do that perimeter pin. Exactly. So I use 2 6-foot tables. I put it outside on my deck, and that's how I baste my quilt. Now, let's move on to quilt stabilization. Let me go back to this view. Quilt stabilization, what is that? Why do we need it, right? If you're working with a quilt on a long arm on a frame, this may not apply. However, it could. it just depends on the quilt, right? It depends on the quilt. Quilt stabilization can happen in a number of ways. How would you guess we can stabilize the quilt sandwich? That's basically what it is. Quilt stabilization is stabilizing a basted quilt to minimize the fabric movement. Now we know because we prepped our fabric, it's been starched and either we've pinned or spray basted, so the movement may not be much, right? But we want our quilt to be as square as possible. So what ways do you think with thread, with machine stitching, can we stabilize the quilt? Meaning the quilt blocks, the borders and sashing. Yes. So Lori says she pretty much spray based and she missed the edge because of the quick fix. Ah, okay. I'm not sure what you mean by because of the quick fix, but maybe you're answering someone's question. Marcia says stabilizing quilt is done by my quilting friend. So here's one suggestion that many of us use as our quilting method. We will stabilize, but actually quilt our entire quilt by stitching in the ditch. Stitching in the ditch. Yay, Karen, she said it. Stitch in the ditch. Yes, that is the first way, or one of the first ways we actually quilt our projects, right? Now, I have to go back and say one thing that I failed to mention. And Quilt Conversations live on the first Friday of the month is sponsored by Clover. Clover Needlecraft. Ladies, you know Clover, right? One of our favorite companies that makes sewing, quilting, and crafting tools. And I have a tip for you. Some of you have seen these before, but it bears repeating because they're my favorite, right? We talked about pressing earlier. I'm going to go to my overhead camera. Clover makes 2 rulers that you want to have for pressing. One is the hot ruler. And if you haven't heard of it before, it's a pressing ruler that you can put on fabric and measure. You can measure to make a hem, a binding, a mitered corner, and it's heat resistant, meaning when you put the iron on top and you press the fabric to get a 1-inch or 1.5-inch hem, this can be touched. It's not like the metal ones where it gets hot and you can't touch it. You can touch this one. So this hot hammer, I love it. And then this is the hot ruler, and then this is the hot hammer. So there's 2. This is the short one with the corner for mitering, and then this is the hot ruler. Both by Clover. Elaine says those rulers are great. Yes. And Sharon says she loves them. Awesome. I love them too. If you are new to this, all you have to do, if you've never heard of it and you want to know how these work, go to Clover's YouTube channel. They have a video on how to use these and how to make beautiful mitered corners. These are table napkins. Do we still use table napkins? Let us know in the chat. Do you use table napkins? Let me know. I was able to make these fat quarter size table napkins and get beautiful mitered corners using the hot ruler. And of course, to press the hem. Beautiful stitching, perfect hem, all with the hot ruler. There is a video on their YouTube channel that shows you how to do this. Go check it out if you've never seen these before. All right. Yay. Awesome, awesome. So I wanted to make sure I talked about that. I was supposed to talk about that in the beginning, but hey, I remembered, and a lot of you love these rulers, and I'm glad you use them. Awesome, awesome. All right, so back to stitching the ditch. Stitching the ditch in blocks and 8 inches apart, or whatever size the blocks are. So, what do you mean by that, Denise? I stitch in the ditch in blocks about 8 inches apart, whatever block size they are. Okay, is that how you stabilize? That no matter what size quilt you have, meaning an 8-inch block or 12-inch block, you are stitching in the ditch? And are you finished quilting, or are you using that to stabilize? Awesome. Loretta says she does use table napkins for the holidays. Fantastic. Well, if you are making some new table napkins, you need that hot ruler or the hot hammer. It's fantastic for pressing perfect hems. Elaine says my husband is too messy for them. But aren't napkins for that, just for that reason? Don't we use these table napkins just for that reason? I don't know. And Sharon says she still uses table napkins. They're good, too good for his lips. That means they must be beautiful, Sharon. They must be beautiful. Awesome. Jackie says she has the hot uh, hammer, and it's great for binding. Awesome. Great help with binding. So popular tool for our sewing and crafting room. So we're talking about quilt stabilization. And the first way we can do that, right, is stitch in the ditch. When we first started quilting, for many of us, stitch in the ditch is what we did to finish the quilt. Now we can use it to stabilize the quilt now that we've learned different techniques. And so we don't different quilting techniques. Let me clarify that, like ruler quilting or free motion quilting. We don't have to stitch in the ditch for the entire quilt if we are using other quilting methods to quilt our project, like walking foot quilting, past the ditch, or free motion quilting or ruler quilting. I would grab a paper towel. You're funny, Marcia. So, the main thing we want to do, just like anything, ladies, I want you to, my desire is for you to grow as machine quilters and to experience different things. And when we test and experience different techniques, we find what we enjoy and what we like. And we toss away those things that we don't. And that only can happen if we test, right? So, once I started to move past the ditch quilting, I moved into free motion quilting, but my quilt still needed to be stabilized. So, what thread do we use for stitching the ditch? If you stitch in the ditch, let us know what thread you use and what weight is it. Let me know. Before I share what I use, I want to know what you use to stitch in the ditch and to stabilize. I have 1, 2, 3 different threads that I use for stabilizing with stitch in the ditch. All right, let me know before I... Yes, Denise says she uses stitch in the ditch for stabilizing. All right, awesome. What thread do you use for stitch in the ditch? I'm curious. Maybe we use the same thread. I'd like to know. Karen says she uses 40 weight thread for stitch in the ditch. Okay. Who else? Denise said she stitched in the ditch. I'm curious what weight you use. Who else said they stitch in the ditch? I think it was only Karen and Denise. Yes? Denise uses 90 weight. I haven't tried 90 weight thread. That's really, really fine. That's fine. I like that. Jackie says cotton thread. That must really just melt right into the seam and you don't see it. I'm going to have to try that. So I will use 60 weight thread. I use 60 weight thread. I have it on the spool and I have it on the larger spool, small one and larger, and it's bottom line 60 weight, and I use a specific number. I use the color number 623. 623. It's a gray thread that almost looks invisible. It is so light that it disappears. It disappears into the seam because it's 60 weight, but now I'm thinking I need to try that 90 weight because it will be even thinner than this. 90 weight, I'll have to try that. You really have me wanting to go buy some right now. Denise. But I've been using 60 weight, and I've also used monofilament or monopoly. This also will disappear. There's the smoke, and then there is a clear invisible thread by Sulky, and then Superior Threads has monopoly. All right. So Sonia says she uses the same thread 50 weight. I have picked quilting from an entire quilt because I did not like the thread. Wow, Kimberly. Woo. All right. It must invest in the light gray. Yep. If you ever use the monopoly, we're going to have a session on thread. You want to make sure that it is not nylon, that it is polyester. Do you use monopoly in the bobbin? I do not. I do not use it in the bobbin. I do not use it in the bobbin. So make sure that it's polyester and not nylon. Nylon will yellow, and these are all heat resistant and machine washable. And it's not recommended to use these monopolys in baby quilts, right? Okay. So is 40 weight polyester okay? What do you use in the bobbin when using monopoly filament? Okay, I will use the 60 weight. If I'm using the monopoly, I use the 60 weight in the bobbin. So if I'm using the 60 weight 623, I will use one in the top and one in the bobbin. If I'm using this for the top, the poly for the top thread, then it's the 60 weight 623 in the bobbin. So much to learn. So what's in the bobbin? Did I answer that question? So top thread is the poly. Bobbin is the 60 weight. 60 weight bottom line. If I'm using the bottom line for the top, I'm going to use it also for the bottom. So it will be top and bottom thread. If I'm using the poly, top only, and the 60 weight is in the bobbin. All right, let's go back to this quilt. This is Color Wave, and there are other ways that we can stabilize our quilt. We don't have to stitch in the ditch, right? We can stitch next to the ditch. I generally will not use a 40 weight thread for stitching in the ditch. because the thread is too thick. I want the stitch in the ditch to disappear into the seam. I don't, and then sometimes, we miss the seam, right? So we don't want it on top. Lots of testing with threads. That is so true, Lori. We do need to test. And the more you test and educate yourself on threads, the more you will know what you like and what you will use to get the result that you want. I'm sharing what I use, what I like, and why I use it. But ultimately, you have to test for yourself, right? So if you are just starting to stabilize with stitch in the ditch, I recommend you test 50 weight, 60 weight, and 40 weight. And now our friend just told us she uses 90 weight. So I'm going to test 90 weight thread and see the difference and see if I prefer it over 60. All right. Oops, I looked in the thread. It is a 80 weight. Okay, she doesn't use 90, she uses 80. So I'm going to try that. Now, if I am stitching next to the ditch and not in the ditch, then I will use a thread that's either the background thread that I'm going to quilt with free motion quilting or other types of quilting. And it's going to be my filler thread. Or I will use a neutral thread that works well with all of the fabrics in the quilt. So sometimes I will stitch in the ditch depending upon the quilt. Other times I will stitch near the ditch and then I will outline around the patchwork pieces. That is another way we can stabilize the quilt. When we do that method, guess what we can do? Especially if we have an open area for free motion quilting, we can stitch around the patchwork and then continue to free motion quilt in the open area around the patchwork. That minimizes how much we have to break thread. But another thing that we can do when we stabilize a quilt, we can section off the quilting. We can create space for the free motion quilting. So can you see the zigzag in Color Wave? Those straight lines going right down the middle of each block. I did a zigzag for each row of Color Wave, putting a line right through the middle of each block. That was how I stabilized Color Wave. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So once I stabilized each row in the quilt, I then did an echo. And now it became part of the quilting design. Right? So I didn't stitch in the ditch. I have slowly gained confidence with my quilting, with my basting method, with the batting that I use. I know how far apart I need to stitch. Now I'm moving out into new territory. As we try these different techniques, we gain confidence. We know exactly how we like to baste and the results that we get because we've done it over and over again. We know how to do it, right? Once we start stitching in the ditch. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. So, zigzag from one corner to the next. You can do that on a home machine. You can do it on a long arm. Now the quilt is stabilized. And the other thing about doing it this way is that we are dividing the tasks of quilting into manageable time frames, manageable pieces of effort. After I zigzag maybe 2 rows, that's all I can do for the day. The next day, I can finish up a couple of more. Then once that's done, in between each zigzag is my free motion quilting design. And I can do that channel of quilting one row at a time, right? So that is another way that we can manage stabilizing our quilt. Stitching the ditch, stitching near the ditch with a heavier weight thread. We can also stitch from one end of a block to the next to create a design, a quilting design, a straight line design, creating a frame for free motion quilting, right? That stabilizing now becomes a design element in the quilting. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is how we can practice some of these techniques. All of these require practice, and you ladies know that I love to practice on pre-printed fabric panels, and so I worked on one this week, and I'm going to show you what I did, which is stitching around. Instead of stitching in the ditch, I stitched around the patchwork. Okay? I stitched around the patchwork. Then I added some additional lines, which I call frames. So around each of the stars, I stitched. That stabilized the patchwork. I mean, well, there isn't patchwork because it's a panel. If it was patchwork, that's what it would do. But it stabilizes the entire quilt sandwich by me stitching around the patchwork pieces, the stars and the pink or purple. I'm not sure how you can see it, what color it is. And now it is ready for free motion quilting. But guess what? It can stay exactly as it is, and I don't have to add anything else, right? But you know me, I love to multitask. I love to test things out, and I'm going to add free motion quilting to this. So the first thing was to stabilize the panel. It's one piece of fabric, and I stabilized the whole thing by stitching around the patchwork pieces. The quilt is stabilized. The next thing, I want to add frames, additional lines, frames to create space for free motion quilting. Just like colorway behind me, the zigzags going through each row created space to add free motion in the middle, right? So, thank you, Lori, for that reminder. So the next thing is I started to add the free motion quilting. I am adding a quilting design that I know and that I like and enjoy. But I could also add free motion quilting that I want to get better at, right? Or I want to change the scale. The space or the framing that I provided for the free motion quilting is very small. And so if you've ever watched any of my videos, I've always talked about changing the scale of our free motion quilting. We want to practice a design, learn it, practice it. Then practice with purpose by changing the scale from small, medium, large in terms of the scale. Thank you. I remember I love our time together too. So this is a design that allows me to quilt in steps, right? Step by step by step. And at the end of each step, I can pause and evaluate my progress. Do I like what I've done so far? Or do I want to take something out? Right? If we break down our quilting process, it becomes manageable, and then we can always step back and go another direction if one step is not working out, right? All right, let's take a look at who would like to look at this live. You see me stitching it out. I'm going very slow. This is like real time, right? I don't think you're going to see me stitch this the whole thing. I'll show you with the overhead camera because I haven't finished it. It's not finished. All right, so here it is, right? This texture right here is what you just saw me stitching. I stitched around, excuse me, the patchwork pieces of the panel, right? It's a panel, so it's not real individual pieces. But by stitching around it, it gives that impression that it's an individual piece of fabric, right? That was the first thing that I did. First thing. After that, I stitched from here. I stitched around each of these and then added the triangle. And that's what you see right here. And I could stop there. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you like it. Thank you, thank you. This is one of my quilt panels that I designed, not just for me, I designed it for you as well, so you can get this panel and quilt it too. You can practice on this quilt panel some of the techniques we've talked about stitching alongside instead of in the ditch. You can practice framing. You can practice with different types of batting. Sometimes I will quilt the same thing with different battings if I am trying to learn that part of the 10 steps to stress-free machine quilting. I take projects like this, a small panel, and I practice those things. I try different tools to see what will I like in my bigger quilts. Ultimately finding what thread I like because I've tried it on something small like this. Dina, you make your day extend to 26 hours of creating. uh You can get the panel on my website. I put a link. Are you on Facebook? Facebook at the very top, plus on YouTube. Go to the very top of the chat or the comments, and there's a link to my website. That link takes you to the 10 steps to stress-free machine quilting, but you can also check out the headings at the top and click on shop and you'll see the fabric panels. You'll see the fabric panels right up there. So I'm going to finish this off and little by little I'm going to quilt in the rest of these frames. And maybe by the next time you see me, you might see this finished, right? But it's step by step by step. Beautiful texture, right? I love to quilt and use the techniques I know and then add one new thing every single time. Add something new so that we're always practicing and learning, right? We're practicing, we're learning, we're adding something new. So Karen, hopefully you were able to find that. So that was our discussion on basting, right? Quilt stabilization, and there's so much more to that. Several ladies like Lori and others are already in the 10 steps to stress-free machine quilting course. They are in the course, they are taking the class, they are going through the videos on my demonstrations. Those videos have demonstrations on the thread, on the pressing method, on the pressing tools, on the batting choices, on the thread. I think there are at least 3 videos, right? It's an opportunity to help you improve those areas that you want to improve. We all want to enjoy free motion quilting, machine quilting, making a quilt, and perhaps you are fine where you are, right? But sometimes, if we're introduced to something new, like someone said they use 80 weight thread, I'm going to try that, right? So go as far as you want to go in your machine quilting life. The main thing is to have fun and make quilts for the purposes for which you like to make them. If you enjoy just the process of making quilts, enjoy it any way that it makes sense for you, right? I share these tips and ideas with you so that whatever area you want to improve on, you can get some help with that. And that's why we're having this 10 steps to stress free machine quilting, and ultimately this reintroducing of the course through the Master Class Series, having a discussion about different tools and techniques. Yes, Lori, even though she has access to all the recordings, she still comes to the live session and takes notes. And that's a good practice. There's always tips that everyone shares live that is different each and every time we're together, right? You're welcome. You're welcome, Jackie. My pleasure. You're welcome, Marcia. Hey, there goes Lorraine. Good to see you. So glad that you're here. Um, our quilting journey is personal. It's our individual journey, right? Someone like me who comes on YouTube and Facebook and other social media to share or makes courses. I hope, just like me, most of us are excited about quilting and we want to share the things that we've learned to help you go where it is you want to go in your quilting journey. And that's my desire. I want to help you go as far as you want to go, right? And I always say, take those things that will help you, and the other stuff that's not you, just toss it aside. We are all different, right? And that's the beauty. You make it work for you, right? So, um, what else? What else? You are welcome, Loretta. Welcome, welcome. Awesome. Elaine says a panel is on her Christmas list. All right. Fantastic. Oh, you took the class, Loretta. I'm so glad. Yes, we had a free motion quilting class at her guild in Delaware. We had a ball. The ladies were amazing. They were learning free motion quilting, many of them for the first time, and they did fantastic. They used the first part of the course that I have called oh my goodness, I just got a blank in my head for this class, the alphabet design course. So the alphabet design course, which several ladies are already taking, is using what we know for free motion quilting, right? And they started out using the letters in the alphabet to learn free motion quilting, and they did fantastic. Yes. Awesome, awesome. All right, ladies, I think that's it for tonight. The next time we meet, we're going to discuss quilting design and density, and we're going to talk about design placement. Once our quilt is stabilized, once we are ready to quilt it, the stabilization is going to be influenced by our design choice, right? What design and how dense we quilt it is going to influence how we stabilize the quilt. And what else is going to influence that? Our batting. So it matters what batting and how we stabilize what design we're going to use, or vice versa. If we have already picked the quilting design, we have to make sure it matches the batting. Um, the batting requirements for quilting, right? And lastly, I'm thankful to Clover, who has been a sponsor of Quilt Conversations Live. They sponsor the first Quilt Conversations Live of every month, and it's been fabulous to highlight their products. I love Clover products. And today it was all about the hot hammer and the hot ruler. These are fantastic tools for making miters, for making hems. If it's not in your tool chest, you might want to consider it. And if you're thinking about a gift for a friend, I know she would, or he be anxious and happy to get one of these as a gift for the holidays. Hot ruler and the hot hammer. And I know some of you ladies say that you make napkins for the holidays, and so I pulled mine out. This is half of a fat quarter that I like to use for travel, for lunch, right? Or you can use a whole fat quarter and make beautiful mitered corners and beautiful hems with the hot ruler. All right, ladies. Cassie says she learns something new each time. Awesome. I'm glad to hear it. You're welcome. You're welcome, Jacqueline. Yay. And Lori, can't wait to get the jam. Get to work. Get to work. Thank you. You like them. Awesome. Doesn't everybody quilt? Marsha, it's like, doesn't everybody quilt? Yes. You're welcome, Karen. Thanks for sharing your tips on stabilization and how you stabilize your quilt. Thank you for all your comments. Really like that. Thank you. Oh, Elaine, I just saw your comment. Design choice and density is what I need help with. Yeah, that is a constant challenge, right? Yes. And that's why I love the small fabric panels or any quilt panel, right? Get a quilt panel, and I think someone said that they're going to do that. Use that to practice these techniques. If you get like 3 or 4 of the same quilt panel, right? Quilt them all differently. That will help you practice choosing different designs. Mm. Yes, get some sleep now. Have a good rest, Elaine. It's probably midnight over there now. Yes, everyone does quilt, says Jacqueline. All right, ladies, it's so much fun to be with you. I will see you next time for another Quilt Conversations live. And don't keep it a secret. Let others know so that they can enjoy the fun and also learn some new things about machine quilting. And if you haven't, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow me on other social media on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I'm on there as well. And don't forget to give it a thumbs up. All right. I'll see you next time for another Quilt Conversations live.